Quite often, war is the focal point of a fantasy story. But equally often, the actual raising of an army is kind of assumed. It's kind of maybe mentioned that there's a press gang, or that the banners are called, or that the professional army is sent, without any real impact on the world, the society, or the war itself even. But I think that there is a lot of potential for both storytelling and world building in the space of what kind of army a given area has. What kind of army does a noble have, and how does it work when that noble wants to go to war and needs to raise an army? And that is the topic of my conversation today. Let's take a look at various types of armies, how to raise an army, and what that means for your story and your world. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you like the kind of videos that I create here and you want to support me in making more of them, you can hit my Ko-fi page, link down below, where you can leave a once-off donation or become a monthly member. In addition, I am a fantasy author and you can purchase my books on Amazon.com, link to my author profile down below. And thank you very much to all of my supporters who do make this a lot easier. Okay, let's crack on. The first model that I want to talk about is a citizen militia, or the obligations of citizenship. The best example of this is probably Athens in the early Republican period. All young men between the ages of 18 and 20 were required to attend military service. This gave the Athenian Republic a large pool of reserves to draw on, and during wartime, the Republic was entitled to call up the reserve force of men up to the age of 60 years old. Most of the other city-states of Greece followed a similar model, although some of the city-states did have a small professional army called the Epilektoi. The most famous of these was probably the Sacred Band of Thebes, that were 300 men, 150 couples, and they were all male couples, gay couples, who were sworn to defend their partners to death. This, I think, is a very interesting model, that you have your small military force and then you have a larger citizen force that you can call on in defense, or if you're going out onto a massive war. And this becomes part of your requirements for citizenship. We also see this model in Stormship Troopers, where serving in the military is a path to citizenship. Now, this kind of model works fairly well, but it does not give you the real professional army that you would need for imperial expansion. Even Sparta, who took this model to its outer edges, so in Sparta, men entered training at the age of 7, and they were brought up in militaristic barracks, and at 20 they actually joined the common mess halls and were kind of part of the soldiery. So their whole citizen population, actual citizens of Sparta, was in the army, and they also bulked out their army with slave soldiers and non-noble soldiers. On a side note, this did result in Spartan women being freer than women in the rest of Greece, probably because the men were pretty much consumed with military matters and someone had to look after the farm. An interesting application of this in fantasy was where Douglas Hill, who is a children's author, wrote the Young Legionnaire book, which was a precursor to his Legionnaire series. Now, in this book, the entire population of the planet of Muros were trained in this military fashion, both men and women. What Muros exported to the rest of the galaxy was its military might. They would hire out either small squads of their military or even sometimes their entire force. And so their whole culture was focused on military matters and it was their primary export, which of course created a very militaristic society. So you can have this citizenship requirement around your military life, but if it's not going to be the focus of your society like it was for Sparta or the planet of Muros, it is likely that this kind of model is going to come up short if you want, for example, an expansionistic empire. And we can see that in the evolution of the Roman Republic's military. The early Romans inherited this model of the citizen militia. A landowner was expected to fight when called on and had to maintain their own arms and armor. This meant, of course, that the wealthier and more influential citizens were better equipped, and your army's actual equipment loadout was very variable from soldier to soldier. After the Carthaginian Wars, it became clear that the Roman army had to change, and those changes were driven by a man called Marius in what is often called the Marian Reforms. These reforms removed the requirement that a soldier had to own property in order to serve in the military. It also removed the requirement where the soldier had to provide their own arms. The state supplied the soldiers' equipment, the soldiers' loadout, and indeed, Marius actually defined the soldiers' loadout and how they packed them and made the men train with that loadout. They were called Marius's mules because he made them carry so much weight. Anyway, so these soldiers were also paid, and because of this payment and the benefits of signing up, many of Rome's poorer citizens signed up for the army, massively bulking out Rome's professional army. And the work was found for this army in expanding first the Republic's empire and eventually the Roman Empire's land size. On a side note, in the case of the Roman army under Marius's reforms, the soldiers were often more loyal to their generals than they were to the Senate, and as such, this eventually led to the downfall of the Roman Republic and the rise of empire, as individual generals became more important than the collective Senate. So that's a professional army. Now, you should bear in mind that a professional army requires a lot of money to maintain. You're not just going to have a professional army without giving up something. The NATO requirement for spending in order to join the army is a minimum of 2% of your GDP. And that's probably a fairly good number to look at to maintain at the minimum a defensive army. So your country or your region or your noble has to be able to spend at least that amount of money, relative to their population and their output of goods and their general economic situation. They have to spend at least 2% of that on their army in order to have anything like an effective force. Size-wise, if you have a large standing army, you're probably going to need to find some use for it. People aren't going to want to spend massive amounts of money maintaining a professional army if you never put it to any kind of use. Also, bear in mind that if you have that kind of army, it must mean that you have a good-sized population, because you are going to have soldiers away from the land and the farms for an extended period of time. So the Roman soldiers served for up to 25 years, and somebody had to be minding the store back home while this happened. So either your women are serving as your farmers and are maintaining the land at home, or you have second sons and younger children maintaining the farm, or something should be happening with your population back home. So you need a large enough population density that you can have men out in the army and still have enough people back home to maintain your agricultural produce. And lastly, a professional army probably does require some form of fairly strong centralized government, some form of a country. It is unlikely that you're going to have a standing army if you have a single barony or that kind of county-sized area. You probably need some kind of reasonably sized state, and you also need the attendant bureaucracy, because a professional army requires equipment, they require logistics, they require training. All of these things require the bureaucracy of state. So don't just think about it in terms of, oh yes, I have an army. Remember that an army needs a support structure, and an army needs bureaucracy to keep it floating. So consider how your army is supported by your state if you have a professional army. However, Rome did fall, and that gave rise to feudalism in Europe, which brings me to owning land means bringing soldiers, a model that applied both in Europe under feudalism and in Japan under the samurai system. So I'm briefly going to discuss both of those models. When we think of feudalism, this is typically what we see in a lot of fantasy. When King Theoden says, muster the Rohirrim, and when Robb Stark says, call the banners, that is what they're talking about. The king or the liege lord sends word to the lesser lords who swear loyalty to him to bring to his cause their soldiers that they are obliged to provide. Now, how this works is it's essentially pretty much a Ponzi scheme. The king owns the land, theoretically, and he parcels this out to lesser nobles, and these lesser nobles have their fiefs on these lands. And then each noble is obligated to supply to the king or the higher noble above them a certain amount of men in return for this grant of land. Now, often peasants on these lands were required to maintain their own armor and should be ready to answer the call. But it was rare that they used peasant levies in this case. They would rather utilize a corps of fighting men who were also farmers and knights and so on, and men at arms, than to raise the peasant levies. The problem with peasant levies was they had poor training, poor equipment, and someone needs to tend the farm, because when you come back from war, you want to have something to eat. And that's why noble lords in the medieval times maintained men-at-arms as a sort of small professional army around their castles. Both Tolkien and George R.R. Martin used this model, and you can see it extensively in their works. I use a mix of a professional army corps with this model because my empire, where most of the action in my novels takes place, is a large, stable force that has a strong professional core army in some of the duchies, not all of them, but does also have a tradition of calling up the population in case of major conflict. This is an interesting model to use because it allows you to use your nobles as central points in the conflict. It is part of the job of a noble to fight in this kind of model, which means that your noble point of view characters or your noble secondary characters, etc., can get directly involved in the conflict. And this results in, of course, those characters being placed in dangerous situations, which always creates interesting stories. And of course, it's a model that we know well from everything that we know about the Middle Ages, so it is often used in our Western fantasy. But it's also the model that was very prevalent in Japan starting around the 10th century. Japan relied on landowners to provide men for their conflict, much the same as the West did. And this was the start of the samurai class. Now, it wasn't just the nobles who fought, just the same as in the European example. The men who worked on the lands that the landowners owned were used as the foot soldiers of the armies. And when the Mongols invaded Japan in 1274 and 1281, those soldiers were called up frequently to repel the invaders. You can see some of this in action in the PlayStation game Ghost of Tsushima, which is currently my favorite PlayStation game, where you see some of these Ashigaru soldiers fighting side by side with the samurai of the island of Susumu. Now, there was constant warfare between the 14th and 16th centuries in Japan, and this thinned out the ranks of those peasant soldiers quite significantly. And it gave rise to the practice of hiring the foot soldiers, and this is when they started to be called Ashigaru in truth. And they formed the backbone of samurai armies, especially after the introduction of flintlock guns by the Portuguese in 1543, because it takes much less training to train somebody to use a gun than it does to train somebody to use a bow, so your peasants became much more useful. And speaking of hiring soldiers, let's talk about mercenaries, because mercenaries have been with us probably since the idea of warfare occurred to us. Now, I did already speak about the condottieri when I spoke about adventure guilds in fantasy, and you can check out the video in the information card. But they weren't the only type of mercenary in Europe. There was also the Landsknecht, the German mercenary pikemen. So they fought in pike phalanxes, and they primarily served to counter knights' charges and so on. Now, these guys came from all walks of life, and they had different reasons for being part of these mercenary companies. Some of them were there because of financial needs, some of them were there for the adventure and plunder, etc., etc. Some of them were probably criminals hiding out from the law. Now, Landsknechts fought for anyone. They also fought against anyone and often elected their own officers and carried out military justice within their societies. By the middle of the 16th century, underemployment and a population explosion in Europe had pushed a lot of people into the Landsknecht ranks. And this resulted in roving bands of Landsknecht menacing all parts of Europe. And then with increased reliance on gunpowder and commanders abandoning pike squares in favor of shallower formations because of the changes in military forces that necessitated, Landsknechts eventually were ended by the various states of Europe who put an end to the banditry and turned rather to gun formations and musketeers. Mercenaries are also common in fantasy. Probably the best example, in my opinion, is The Black Company by Glenn Cook. Now, the entirety of The Black Company focuses on the mercenary band by the same name. And they will work for anyone. Indeed, in the first book, in the opening chapter, they are in the process of switching sides from their rebel side to the government side of the lady. They have to maintain their reputation as fighting men, and the books focus on the kind of culture that exists within such a mercenary company. How the men interact with each other, the result of fighting together so often and having your lives dependent on each other. The first book is told from the perspective of the doctor of the mercenary company. And this is an important point to remember. If you have mercenary companies, they probably have to supply all of their own logistical support, including medical support, food, camp followers, even things like siege engines, armor, weaponry, etc. And of course, they have to get paid. If they don't get paid, all of this maintenance falls by the wayside. So they always have to be ready to make some kind of a deal to get paid in terms of plunder, or perhaps even to switch sides if they don't get paid. So mercenary culture is a very fascinating thing where you are a dealer of death, but one that has a kind of accepted place in society. I always think that it adds some interesting elements to your military force to include those mercenary companies. Okay, but we've spoken about feudalism and its result, and we've spoken about mercenary companies. But what about in the more modern sense? Let's talk a little bit about conscription and mass mobilization. So you can have something like a conscription force where all people are required to serve in the military. Now, this can even be implemented like the Athenian model, where it is a requirement of citizenship, etc. Finland has such a thing. It doesn't determine your citizenship model, but by law, all men have to serve in the army for a year. If we are invaded, then we have a pool of reservists who can be called up to defend the country. Normally, this kind of conscription model doesn't impose your own equipment rules and so on. So it's not exactly the Athenian model where you also expect it to be a militia that supplies its own equipment. It's just you must come and serve in the army now. Kind of an extension of the press gangs of the Renaissance period. Now, this does give you a large reserve force to call on, but it is best used as a defensive rather than offensive army, since these people aren't volunteering to serve, they are being forced to serve, and there should probably be a good reason why you're doing this. The same applies to mass mobilization of your societies. Now, the thing about mass mobilization is it is very different between a sedentary and a nomadic society, as you can see if you look at the armies of the Mongol Empire. Now, in the Mongol Empire, the bodyguards of the Khan formed kind of the core of the officers of the empire. They were his trusted subordinates. And you can see that in George R.R. Martin with the concept of blood of my blood for the horse lords of the Easteros continent. Now, what the Khans in our world did was they brought the subject people of their empire, they took their children as hostages and brought those hostages into that core bodyguard around the Khan, and they trained them on the warfare that was required of the Mongol people. When these children went back to their own lands, not only were they loyal to the Khan, having been indoctrinated into his service at a young age, but they also could then bring their local forces to bear to kind of fill out the Mongol armies and provide the less mobile troops to fill the gaps that the cavalry couldn't fill in entirety. Now, the reason why I say that general mobilization is easier in a nomadic kind of culture is because you are moving with your population. So your soldiers can be mobilized in full while your women mind the cattle and keep control of the camp. Indeed, Mongol women were often trained in warfare and could shoot very well so that they could form a last line of defense should the camp itself be attacked. So you can build on that kind of nomadic culture where your army and your population move together, and that gives you access to a much larger pool of soldiers. But bear in mind that a nomadic culture does mean that you are not going to have an agrarian society. You're not going to have landowners. Instead, you will have pasture rights and camping rights, and the bulk of your wealth will be in mobile wealth like cattle or horses or camels or such like livestock, rather than agrarian seed farming. So, how do you raise an army in your world? Well, I think the first thing you should do is pick a kind of model for your army. Do you have a conscription army or do you have a volunteer army? Are people forced to serve or do they volunteer to serve because of the benefits offered? Then you should pick probably between professional armies and militia armies. So, do people train and then stand ready to be called up, or are they actually in the army? Do you have a military component of your society that is a permanent standing force? Think about the type of society you have and how that influences your army. If you have a nomadic army, do you have a kind of mass mobilization that moves with your army? If you have a feudal society, do you have the structure where your nobles maintain men at arms but can call up the peasant population in dire need? Do you use mercenaries? Do you have large groups of mercenaries that roam the countryside looking for trouble? Is your army largely fought between professional armies that rent themselves out to make war? When you're raising an army, don't forget about logistics. Remember, an army is all very fine and well, but you need food, you need weapons, you need tents, you need ammunition. You need all of these things, and who is going to supply them, and how are they going to get from where they are made to where they are needed? When your archer turns around and there are no more arrows behind him, you've got a lot of problems. And speaking of logistics, don't forget about the non-combatants required to support an army. You need medical personnel. You probably need camp followers. Those men need somewhere to go. You need armorers and engineers. You need laundresses and tailors. You need cooks and grooms. There's a whole plethora of people who support a soldier out in the field, and they need to come from somewhere, they need to live somewhere, and they probably need some kind of protection to ensure that they don't all just run away from the army. Soldiers can get rambunctious. There needs to be some kind of principle and culture to protect those non-combatants within your army. Remember that few people want to die. So if you're going to have an army and if you're going to raise an army, there needs to be some kind of motivation for those people. Now, you can use the iron might approach. You can force people to join the army. But if you do that, then you need a professional army that is loyal to you, that will force those people to join your army. Alternatively, you can use propaganda, and check out my video on propaganda in the information card. Or you can use nationalism as a driving force. Or you can use the benefits of joining the army, money, or free education, or maybe help with housing, or some kind of monetary reward for joining the army. But think about what is going to motivate people to come and join your army. And those are my thoughts on raising an army in a fantasy world. If you liked this video, hit the thumbs up button and maybe check out my video on flying, monsters and war. And if you want to connect around this or any other topic, remember that I do have a Discord server linked down below, and I will see you soon for another video from Just in Time Worlds.